Executive producer, Brian Hertzock. Presents Bobbie Clark. Education, current events, and topics that affect you.
Welcome to Let's Talk About It. I'm Bobbie Clark, the host of Let's Talk About It. We have a very thought-provoking show for you today, which includes a discussion of stop and frisk, stand your ground, and the mass incarceration of black males, where Louisiana has the highest incarceration in the world. Yes, you heard me right, in the world. Mass incarceration is something that is really throwing people off. It's hard to believe that we live in a state that has the highest incarceration in the world. That's dwarfing the rates of nearly every developed country, including Russia, China, and Iran. In Germany, 93 people are in prison for every 100,000 adults and children. In the U.S., the rate is roughly 8 times that, or 750 people in prison for every 100,000 adults and children. The Times-Picayune further states that the hidden engine behind the state's well-oiled prison machine is cold, hard cash. A majority of Louisiana inmates are housed in for-profit facilities, which must be supplied with a constant influx of human beings, or a $102 million industry will go bankrupt. Our guests, who will discuss the mass incarceration of black men, are Dr. Albert Green, who is the pastor of Nazarene Baptist Church and an expert on mass incarceration. He's also a participant in the PICO movement, which is People Improving Community Through Organizing. My other guest, Pastor Thomas Bessex, who is pastor of New Gideon Baptist Church. Thank you both for being here. Pastor Bessex, tell me about the PICO movement.
Well, PICO, People Improving Community Through Organizing, is a faith-based nonprofit grassroots organization. And so here in Baton Rouge, PICO has really been working on the mass incarceration issue. As a matter of fact, the BRAVE program that's here in our city is modeled after the PICO movement. They received their model through PICO. So it is a grassroots organization about building community, building people, building capacity among people of color. Okay.
Well, Dr. Green, let's delve into why Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and what has caused the massive increase in the prison rate in the last 20 or 30 years.
Bobbie, I think you said it earlier in your introduction. One, we are in the South. Two, the prison system is a business, and you have to, in business, you have to have that which is necessary in order to keep the business moving. In this situation, we're dealing with people. Now, many of the young people who are in prison now, again, I was listening at this issue in one of your shows that you were dealing with as it relates to racial profiling. I think that our people need to understand, one, that we are in the spotlight. We're not in the spotlight for the right reason. We're in the spotlight for the wrong reason.
What does that mean?
Well, it's like our people are being noticed. I look at in Spanish Town and, of course, in other areas that I travel around the country, and I look at areas where, let's look at the sagging situation. There are people that are taking pictures of our people with the sagging clothes on, and that picture is there to basically deal with them. If there's anything that they do wrong, they already have information on these individuals, so their destination is prison. In other words, we got to get these people off of the street.
So are you suggesting that the point that that child's pants are sagging means that he is seen as a person that is a candidate for prison?
It's a candidate for prison, yes, and it has been proven. It's like, maybe I don't want to jump the gun, Bobbie, but let's look at something. We're having a lot of our people being placed in prison for stuff that they need not be in prison for. For an instance, there are programs within our state and other states that I've traveled into where they have programs that help people. Colorado, I pastored in Colorado for 9 years. Colorado, as far as blacks were concerned, the crime rate was way down. Okay, and when I say way down, at one point in time, Colorado, if they had 16 murders in the course of a year within the whole state, that was a high rate. Okay, it has gone up since we've had the school killings and those types of things within Colorado, but here people are actually profiled based upon the way that they operate, how they operate in public, how they operate even in private. There's always somebody watching, especially our children, to see how, one, they behave, because they feel that a lot of our children's behavior is out of character, and it's because of the things that they do. I started off talking about within the prison system, we have so many young people, Bobbie, who are serving big time for minute stuff. Instead of getting these people some help, we can throw them in jail in order to ensure that the business is continuing to profit.
Okay,
and
now
that's not fair.
And I want to bring Reverend Bessics back in on that. According to the year 2000 findings of the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse, it was reported that 6.4% of whites, 6.4% of blacks, and 5.3% of Hispanics were current users of illegal drugs. The percentage of whites, blacks, use of illegal drugs is the same, yet prisons are overflowing with black and brown offenders, sometimes at rates of 20 to 50 times greater than those of white men. Why is there such a difference in the incarceration rate? And before you answer that, we're going to take a break. But when we get back, that's going to be where we're going to be starting, okay?
Yes.
All right. We'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back to Let's Talk About It. I'm Bobbie Clark, the host of Let's Talk About It. And in the room with me today, I have Pastor Thomas Bessics, who is a minister of New Gideon Baptist Church. And I have Pastor Green, Albert Green, who is the pastor of Nazarene Baptist Church. Welcome. And we are going to get started again. Okay, Pastor Green, Pastor Bessics, when we left, we were talking about the difference in the incarceration versus the crimes. The number of people, the number of blacks and whites who are, let's say, doing drugs or selling drugs, it's equal. But yet the number of the whites in prison can be as much as 50% less than the number of blacks or Hispanics who are incarcerated. And so what we want to do now is talk about why.
Why? Well, that is a multi-tiered type response. One, police generally profile differently based on the neighborhood that they're working. If it's a predominantly African American lower class neighborhood where there are more renters, the police, when they will pick up or catch a young man with marijuana maybe on him or her, a young lady, immediately they're going downtown, immediately they are processed. However, when in other neighborhoods, they may just, a white person may receive just a summons and allowed to go home and show up at court.
So you're saying in essence that where a black child who's in an impoverished area is going to be incarcerated, that white child, or even maybe even a black child who's in, let's say a higher subdivision, might get a slap on the wrist.
They may get a slap on the wrist based on exactly where they live, their socioeconomic status, and then after that, most young African Americans get into the prison system without any resources, any funds of hiring an attorney. A public defender is not necessarily the attorney. The public defender is just there to make sure that your rights are not infringed, and that you're not treated unfairly. So as a result, that also pushes young African Americans into the prison system. Without attorneys, there's no attorney downtown to speak to the judge to move that case up. So a young man may be arrested for a small amount of marijuana and may have to sit in East Baton Rouge prison for 6 months waiting on a trial date if he cannot make bail. And it continues on the 3-strike law. 3 small offenses sometimes in Louisiana, after 3 strikes, that's life in prison.
Okay, so Dr. Green, tell me about the privatized prisons. At one time, all prisons, as I appreciate, all prisoners were incarcerated and held in state-owned, parish-owned prisons. But now, as I appreciate, there are many private prisons that are, especially in small towns all over Louisiana. Tell me about that and how that affects the number of of the black youth who are now in prison.
Let's see if I can do it a different way, Bobbie, and it may be able to help a lot of people to understand. Back in time, as you stated, we did have the state prisons, that kind of thing. Look at the farmers. A lot of people have gotten away from farming, even in Louisiana, so they own property. This property it can be sold, it can be leased, and people will build prisons on those people's property, and it's a continual income for them. So what they're doing is they're utilizing our people by putting them in these privatized prison systems. There are people who are investing in this. So it's strictly a money-making situation. If I'm not mistaken, if we even look at the Sheriff's Department, there are a lot of funds that's coming from those private prison systems that's actually going into the Sheriff's Department. They're doing this because it's a 100% privately owned business, and people are constantly bringing up their property. They're not farming anymore because farming seemed to have been rough. You're out there in the sun. We don't have to do that anymore. They just.
So, are you suggesting that these young kids are now basically chattel?
Yes.
That sounds like what I'm hearing.
That's what it boils down to. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so, and the possibilities of their getting out gets to be more difficult?
It's extremely difficult because, again, you don't want to see a decrease in the income. In the income.
That's serious.
Something was said just earlier by my friend and my little brother, Pastor Bessix, and it makes sense. How many cases, if you actually do a search, how many cases have actually been won by a public defender? Very, 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 very low rate of cases won by a public defender.
Okay.
What happens the impoverished communities, the low-income communities, these children find themselves in trouble. Their parents cannot afford an attorney. Yes, the public defender ensure that their rights are not violated, but they really can't challenge them as it relates to the law. So if you have a public defender, well, if you have a public defender, Bobbie, reality is your destination is you're going to be locked up.
And then public defenders have tremendous caseloads.
Yes.
And it's hard for an attorney, I don't care how good the attorney is, to be truly efficient in each case if you have a ton of cases. And so it makes it hard. It makes it difficult.
And Bobbie, you would also be surprised, and I'm sure we all would be surprised, as to how many other people are invested in the prison system and they're receiving returns. A friend of ours, we were in a session with PICO, and an individual was giving us a descriptive of the prison system and how it works.
Okay, hold that thought.
Yes,
We're going to take a break here, and we will be back in just a moment. And welcome back to Let's Talk About It. I'm Bobbie Clark. My guests are Dr. Albert Green of Nazarene Baptist Church and Pastor Thomas Bessex of New Gideon Baptist Church. Now, we've been talking about incarceration, and we're talking about how this incarceration is really just changing the dynamics of the Black community. And there are so many of as the documentation shows, that a lot of these young men are not in for any serious crimes. There's no murder. Most of it is drugs. Now, I'm not saying that using drugs is good, but I'm saying that what they're being imprisoned for and getting life, we have other Blacks who are in, let's say, higher economic situations, Hispanics and whites who are getting little or no time. How do we rectify this situation?
Well, first of all, to address this issue, the faith community needs to come together. Since I'm a pastor, and I believe the church should be the hub of the community. But too many churches and pastors live on an island alone, and we cannot impact change by ourselves. So we have to come together as a group of people around this cause. And then we have to spend time understanding what mass incarceration is and how that affects us as a people. And I think by coming together, learning what it is, and coming together as a unit, I think as a unit we can raise a voice to legislators and let legislators know that certain laws need to be changed. So that it does not continue this curse of mass incarceration.
Absolutely, and Michelle Alexander has a really great book out on mass incarceration.
Right.
And it's like the return of Jim Crow is what she calls it.
Right.
And that's a very eerie feeling.
Right.
Okay, so Dr. Green, what do you think?
As Pastor Bessex says, we need to go back to our foundation. The church has been, for all of us, our foundation. Out of the church system, and of course, if we can unify ourselves, and as Pastor Bessex says, get these brothers off of this island that they're on, because they feel that they're on their own island.
Now, what brothers are we talking about?
We're talking about some of our pastors.
Okay.
And this is all over the country. Okay. If the church can come back together and rebuild its foundation, because everything that we needed when I was growing up, and I'm a 50s child, it was there at the church. We can, if we unify, we can put together programs. Instead of having these kids to go to jail, why not send these kids to programs that can actually help them, but send them to programs that can actually identify with them and identify with their situation?
I think that's a good point. I belong to Camphor Memorial, United Methodist, and even when I visit other churches, I always find that there are rarely young men in the church. Rarely are they members even. And I always, as I look around, there are so few of them. And I'm wondering, why are they not a part of the church? And why aren't they being recruited? And why aren't there programs that invite them, that make them feel a part?
Well, one of the reasons for that is that the church has not grown with time. Many churches still worship and facilitate ministry the way they did 30 or more years ago. And whereas everything else has changed with time, the message of Christ does not change. But the method of presenting Christ through ministry, of course, changes over time. And I think that churches today don't do a very good job of reaching out and facilitating ministry that draws younger people in, men and women.
I agree. I tell you, as I sit and look, I'm like, well, my Lord, once we're gone, is there going to be a church? Because there's so few of the youth in. And how do we rectify this situation? I mean, if right now our children are being incarcerated, they're not in church, they're not involved in positive programs that would have them with, and there are no males. They're the generation before is locked up. Now they're locked up. We get so many generations locked up. After a while, there's no reproduction of black people as a race. Where does all of this end?
One of the things, Bobbie, that I think all of us need to realize, there are some of us who do, but most of us need to stop and realize what Christ actually said as it relates to his church. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The second thing is he gives us directives. Go into the highways and into the hedges. Now, when you go into the hedges, you're going to find everything that we're talking about right now. So I'm saying it's necessary, or it necessitates, that we go back to the foundation, to the base where it actually began. The church was the help center. The people were the counselors. We have individuals who are educated within our congregations who can actually help these kids, and the system is going to have to understand that locking a child up for marijuana or for drugs, there has to be an alternative route to take in order to make sure that you allow this child to become a citizen again, which is another issue that we need to just touch down on, and that's this. Too many of those kids who are in for drugs, when they come out, they have not yet even been notified that they do have certain rights and they can regain their voting rights, this kind of thing.
Never
so
notified.
What they need to do is, and parents, pastors, members of congregations need to understand, if you have a relative, a child, or whatever that's in that situation, call voter registration. They're going to give you the directives, because you have 1 year, once that child comes out, that child can get back into the system. So it boils down to, again, what Pastor Bessick and I are talking about. Let's go back to the roots. We need to go back to bringing the church people together so that we can set up situations that will be able to help our children and keep a lot of these kids out of prison.
Okay, our time is almost up. So my question is, I'm going to have you guys back.
Yes.
So how long do I need to wait to have you back when you give me a good report?
As soon as you're ready.
Okay, all right, then we are saying that we are going to meet again, and we are going to have a much more positive report.
Some content may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Poverty has been one of the key issues in contributing to the violence, and I feel that as a country, we have had a war on drugs, we've had a war on education, but we haven't had a war on poverty. And until we take that step to eliminate the poor conditions that these individuals are living in, we're going to continue to see violence. Self-preservation has always been the #1 rule in life, so these individuals are definitely trying to provide for their families. They're trying to make a living for themselves, and this is the only means that's being presented to them inside of the areas that they're in. The biggest thing that's going on now is that we actually have a group of parents that hasn't been taught, so it's impossible for them to teach the kids other than what they know. So you need programs that focuses on relationships with parents and kids so that both individuals can be learning at the exact same time that the way that they have been brought up is definitely not the correct way to be living in society. And until we take that step, we're going to continue to see the violence because the kids are not getting what they need from the parent. The parent is giving them the exact same thing that they're getting from video, radio, and television. It's the same old ignorance is what it actually is, and it's being fed to the kids by the parents and then by the entertainers and the individuals that they actually look up to as well. You look at why people go to church is to be fed the word of God. And if that word turns a person into a good person, then a negative word could also turn them into a bad person. So I think it's the parent's responsibility to make sure that the child is nourished properly with the word that's going to give them what they need at the end of life, which should be success. But if you continue to put in garbage, then you cannot expect not to be a part of the trash eventually. I don't think the youth are actually lost. I think the youth are attempting to create their own identity. And because of the people that are leading them to their identifying process, then it's definitely not the right type of leadership in place right now. Are they lost? No. I think that what they have actually seen is about 57 years of a miseducation being handed down to individuals. And if I'm in school and if I was to take a picture of a whole classroom and every time they gave me the picture back and I looked at it, every time I'm in the picture, I'm raggedy, I'm hungry, or I'm a slave, then eventually I don't want to look at this picture no more. So I think that they have been fed or given an education that shows them as being less than others in society. So now they're rejecting that education and going after a lifestyle where they look like somebody and feel like somebody. Even though society may look at them as being nobody, to them in their mind, because their morals have been broken down so low, they feel like they're somebody because they can get the latest Jordans. They could get the best rims that cost a whole bunch of money. So it's a slave type of mentality that they may be caught in, but at the same time it's making them feel good. Well, I got these on and he can't afford them. And what has actually happened is that they have been bred to really react the way that society has acted on them. Society look at them as the has-nots and the poor. So when they could get more than their common next door neighbor, then they look down on their next door neighbor as being a has-not because they have the material things of the world. Changes always have to start within oneself. But in order for a person to realize that a change is needed, then something greater than the individual have to be the beacon light that leads the individual into self-consciousness. Right now we have a people that don't have a true history of who they are not being taught a history of who they are, and have disconnected their self from their suffering that they had in America, not 100 years ago, but 40 years ago. Because it's such a shameful thing to have been through, so they don't want to relate to being kin to those individuals who went through this suffering. So now they are lost people in that sense because they have actually lost their true roots. And a tree cannot live without the roots, is the basic line. So once you lose your roots, then you're definitely dying, and that's what we see. We see individuals dying because they're not connected to the roots that got them to where they are now. So there's no respect for what Dr. King went through. There's no respect for what people went through in Jim Crow. There's no respect for all of the suffering that people of color has gone through in America because they have cut that root off and they're a dying breed because they can't respect what the people went through to get them to where they are now.
And welcome back to Let's Talk About It. You've just seen author Silky Slim Reed. And you just saw his interview with the advocate. And we also have in the house Afi Patterson. And Afi is an attorney. And we're going to be talking in this segment, in addition to having Slim to talk about how he came to this point in helping students or helping children to stay away from the prison system. Then we'll also have Afi to talk about stop and frisk and stand your ground. So we'll start off with you, Slim. Tell me about how you arrived at this point.
Well, when you see the mass incarceration of youth, especially African American youth, most people refer to them of at-risk youth. But we're all at risk, especially if you're African American, if you look at it the way that we see it. So many people are talking about the mass incarceration, but the mass incarceration is actually a continuation of slavery, and it's in the 13th Amendment. So when you see it in the amendment, then you can't really put up a valid argument about a contract that's already in place.
You know, that's a good point, because I went back and read the 13th Amendment, and they talk about how when the 13th Amendment was written, in place was left that anyone who is in the prison system is still basically in slavery.
Anyone that commits a felony crime would basically be put back into slavery.
Absolutely.
And if you really research it thoroughly, in 1875, Justice Turner actually said that it wasn't intended or was it ever thought of for African Americans to be citizens of the United States. So many people like to try to swear away from that actual facts, but those are facts. So when you see a system that has taken away the jobs, you see a system that has made it hard, and you see an uneducated people, then you have to realize that the ultimate trap would be to put back into slavery. So that's what's happening, but we're just not looking at it the way that it actually is, because we all want to act like and see ourselves in the American dream when actually there's a system that's in place and it's still in place. So you have to think about it like this. If you had forefathers and then you had lawmakers that said that they would put you back in slavery, in order to put you back in slavery, then you still have to have someone with a slave master's mentality. So when you see individuals herded off to prison for small crimes, you have to realize that this is now a business, and they would be ludicrous to take away a multi-billion-dollar business to save your child. So it's also up to you to make sure that your child stays out of the system.
And how do you do that?
You have to properly educate the child. But what we see right now is a group of parents that hasn't been taught, so it's impossible for those parents to go back and teach other than what they know. And in most cases, this is ignorance. So when you see a parent that's steeped in ignorance, then they pass that on to the child because they look at it as a glorification to make it into the prison system.
Now, most parents would be terribly insulted to hear you say that they are not equipped excuse me, they're not equipped to educate their child. What exactly do you mean?
I mean that there are parents that just hasn't been taught, that hasn't been educated themselves, and they are comfortable with their condition. In order for you to go to a place that you have never been, you can't be comfortable where you are. Unfortunately, we have become comfortable where we are, and that's feeding off of the trash and the garbage of this world, filling our kids' heads up with lyrics and things that makes them almost dysfunctional in this society. So when you see that take place, then you can't worry about hurting someone's feelings, because ultimately what we're doing is losing generation after generation of young youth and, of course, adult males as well.
And I agree with what you're saying. How do we rectify this situation?
Well, first of all, I think anyone has to actually find the knowledge of self. If you cut a tree off from its roots, it will surely die. So will a people, and I don't think that we have connected ourselves to our actually roots. Black people did not start here in America. We started from the times of ancient. So when you disconnect yourself from your original history, then you can't continue to live, and that's why we see a dying generation continuously.
So what we're saying is that our people fail because of a lack of knowing their history?
Exactly. It's in the Bible as well. The Bible says my people suffer for the lack of knowledge, not because we're poor, raggedy, and out of doors, but we suffer for the lack of knowledge. And until you attain that knowledge that could take you to a higher degree in living, you'll continue to be in the same wretched condition that we're in right now.
I remember in grad school being in a group, an international group, and that's literally what we did on a weekly basis. And when I look back now, I see how important it was, because knowing your history just puts everything in a place where it should be.
Almost definitely.
Afi, I want to bring you in because we're also talking about how it is today, and Slim has talked about why we're in the situation we're in. And now let's talk some about stop and frisk and stand your ground, and also about that 13th Amendment. Because so often, I think most of us don't go back and read those amendments, and we don't realize how much was left out when it was first written. And we think that it was meant for us to be freed, and not to realize that there were some things that were put in place earlier, so that it would always be difficult for the black race to really survive. And tell me about how we deal with that situation, and also what impact stop and frisk and stand your ground is having in Louisiana.
Thank you, Bobbie. Before I address that, if I could just go back a little bit to what Slim was saying earlier about where we are as a people and why we are here as a people. And he mentioned a big factor is parents' lack of education. Now, I work as a criminal defense attorney, and I see every single day, and I'm shocked by it, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who graduated, first of all, are accused of committing, unspeakable crimes, and they never graduated the 8th grade.
And what's an unspeakable crime?
Murder.
Okay.
Armed robbery, burglary. I think that's unspeakable for a 17, 18-year-old,
Yes.
16-year-old charged as adult to be committing.
understand
And I don't understand how it's come to a point where our kids are not making it beyond the 8th grade.
Okay, I think we're going to take a break for just a moment here, and we will be back in just a moment. And welcome back to Let's Talk About It. My guests, Silky Slim, also known as Arthur Reed, and Afi Patterson, attorney Afi Patterson. And Afi, as we were talking before we had the break, we were talking about why we are in the situation we are, and how stop and frisk and stand your ground make the situation even worse.
Right. And I believe that before you get to approach stop and frisk first, I think that stop and frisk laws were probably enacted and drafted in good faith, and it just basically means that a police officer has the right to stop a person that he reasonably believes is involved in criminal activity and briefly detain them and ask them some questions. In order to do that, they have to have some reasonable, articulable facts combined with general inferences with the area, with the time of day or night, and with their overall experience on the force. They can stop a person and briefly detain them. And I think a lot of people have complained in the last decade even that it's kind of gotten out of hand, where people are afraid to leave their homes because they're afraid of being randomly stopped, of course, based on the color of their skin, based on how they look, based on how they're dressed.
Okay, that's a good point. Now, Slim, you're in the community. Is the stop and frisk really working like that, or is there more to it? Is there intimidation, or do the community feel intimidated?
Well, of course, there's always going to be intimidation when you have something in place like the stop and frisk. And I think when you really look at history and where the police department was actually formed, police was actually formed to rile up runaway slaves in the beginning. So when you see individuals that's from that particular culture continually to go into black communities is where the problem come in at. You don't see white communities being stopped and frisked. You see it mostly in African American communities. And of course, they say, well, it's because of the high crime rate, but there are individuals that are actually targeted just because of the color of skin. One of the things that I wanted to comment on is when she said that she just can't see how individuals would actually drop out of school in the 8th grade. If I was to take a picture of an auditorium and I'm in it, when I get it back, I'm going to look for me in that picture. So when I see myself in the picture, and every time I see myself in the picture, I'm raggedy, I'm poor, and I'm outdoors, or I'm a slave, then eventually I don't want to take any more pictures. So kids are not being motivated to stay in school because they're not being taught of their own greatness. You're teaching me of someone else's history, which is a European history, when I have my own history, but you have definitely deleted my history all the way out of the educational programming. So when you see that, then you wonder why kids drop out. Is because they're not being motivated enough to stay in. Everything that you see about the Black American experience here in America has been bad when it comes down into the educational field. The only thing that has been upheld inside of this educational field is Dr. Martin Luther King, Du Bois, and a few others. But when it comes down to the real greatness of who we are and what we accomplished before we made it to America, that has been deleted from history.
So what's the solution?
Yeah, that I was going to ask you. What do you think is the reason that our history is not taught in the schools?
I think there are a lot of reasons. Before I get to that, I do want to ask, what the solution is, because what I do see is, these young adults now who have dropped out in the 8th grade, or maybe even before that, now they have children that they're bringing into the world. So when does the cycle stop? How do we stop it? When do we intervene? How do we intervene? Do we intervene? Or do we just, watch this travesty continue to happen?
If you speak,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you're speaking as a people, it's our responsibility to intervene. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do is stop begging other people to educate us and start educating ourselves. If I'm the heavyweight champion of the world, then you can't come to me and ask me to train you to beat me. I would be crazy to do that, especially when I like being in power. And unfortunately, the individuals that are in power love being in power. And until the power of love becomes stronger than the love of power, we'll continue to be the people that we are, because no one is going to train you to beat them.
Okay. And what are your feelings on that?
Going back to the question you asked, why do I believe our history is not taught? I believe that in most cultures, you are taught the history of the most dominant culture, the most dominant people. I mean, that's, happened in history, and it's happened in modern times, since just the very beginning. It's normal. Why would I teach someone else's history and empower someone else when I can empower myself and continue to do what I've been doing?
But is teaching history empowering someone else over you, or is it a shared? Shouldn't, if true history is really taught, is it just taught so that it is to diminish that other person, or is it so everyone knows the value of who they are?
Right, because there's great value in diversity and learning about other cultures, learning about origins, learning about histories and customs and traditions. There's great value in that.
Okay, and so basically I think what I'm asking is, should that be a part of the curriculum? It sounds like that's what you're saying.
You have to make it a part of the curriculum.
You're saying
when you're dealing with a society and being who we are a conquered people, and we were free, but we were freed, but we were never just free, because we received what they gave us. They gave us the freedom that we say we have today. We didn't fight for it. We prayed for it. We begged for it, but we did not fight for it. Other people have actually fought for their freedom, and they're way ahead of where we are here in America. When you look at the Bahamas and you look at the Caribbeans, they fought for their freedom. Even Haiti, as poor as they are, they fought for their freedom. And what you really have to look at is that there isn't a person that comes from Romania that can't tell you about the suffering that they people went through in the Ottoman Empire. There isn't a Jewish kid that can't tell you about the suffering that they people went through at the hands of Hitler. But when it comes down to young black Americans, they don't even know the history of what we have went through in America. So they don't respect what we went through. And when it comes down to educating, you have to really look at this. You have a group of individuals who take their kids and put them into a private school. It take them and put them into a private Christian academy. So they're teaching their kids to respect the Creator, and then their kids walk out of that school respecting the creation. Our kids are being taught not to even look at a Creator, but to look at a discoverer who couldn't have discovered anything that the Creator hasn't made. So when you have a kid that's being miseducated in that form, then you have the type of society that we see today.
So you're saying we never have gotten past the miseducation of the Negro.
We have never gotten past the miseducation of the Negro. When you
Okay.
try to get past that, then you will see individuals coming out with master's degree being masters and not slaves going to look for a job. So when you say that I have a master's degree but I'm going to look for a job, then I'm just another slave in the program that I just came out of. And that's what the educational system is here in America, is a programming.
Okay, we're going to take a break here, and we will be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Let's Talk About It. My guests, Silky Slim and Alfie Patterson, attorney Alfie Patterson. And Attorney Patterson, I want us to talk some about, because of what has happened with the Trayvon Martin case, and it's really interesting as I look today, and after the case is all over, then we find out that the person who did the killing really had this other side of him that never came out during the trial. But why do you think that is, and why was that allowed to happen?
The other side of him, I'm not familiar with whatever
Okay,
just came out today.
all of the things that have happened with his carrying the gun and his shooting and now abusing his wife.
Well, if the investigators didn't know about it, if the investigators on the prosecutor side didn't know about it, that's probably why it wasn't introduced. Or the defense attorneys can file something called a motion in limine, which they can argue the reasons for excluding that and not being able to introduce it to the jury during the trial.
Are you saying that the trial could be reopened?
No, not on those grounds. Not on the grounds that we know that he's, allegedly abused his wife, or that he carries a gun, because according to news reports that I've read, he lawfully carried the gun. He had a permit for his gun. So just on those grounds, no.
Okay, all right. So tell me about stop and frisk.
Okay.
Well, we talked about that some. So stand your ground. That seems to be one that could cause quite a few problems if it is not handled correctly.
Right. It's basically Louisiana's stand your ground law. I believe it's the code is Louisiana Revised Statute 20, and basically it says that you have the right to use deadly force. It's justifiable homicide. You have the right to use deadly force if you reasonably believe that you are in fear of losing your life or sustaining great bodily harm. Again, that fear has to be reasonable. And with respect to the Trayvon Martin case, if we're comparing the two, we also have a law about the aggressor, the initial aggressor. The initial aggressor cannot claim self-defense and justifiable homicide unless he retreats and he gives up, basically, and he has communicated that withdrawal to the other person. In that case, he can say, I used justifiable homicide because I believe that I was going to be either killed or sustain great bodily injury.
There was a recent case within the last few days where a young man, a football player, was in an accident,
Yeah.
and he went to ask for help, and the woman got upset because for some reason she thought she was in danger and calls the police, and they shoot him 12 times. So I don't know if that's, but they're saying he was running towards them or coming towards them, and one of the police officers just lit into him. So and now they are looking at whether they will file charges against the police officer. Does that police officer then get to do a stand your ground?
Police officers are generally, trained to use some type of force that is not deadly in order to apprehend someone who's accused or that they think has committed a crime or that is attacking them. So they have specialized training. To use deadly force, he would have to think that he can't apprehend him with any lesser force, and that he's going to sustain some type of great bodily harm, according to Louisiana law. I think that was in Florida.
It was in another state.
Right.
Because the other two officers never even pulled their guns, which was the interesting part of that. Would you like to share in that case or something else?
Standing ground is such a tricky law, and here in Baton Rouge, years ago, there was a young Japanese exchange student by the name of Yoshi Hattori who went to an individual's house by mistake, and he was killed.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Halloween night, and he was actually killed by the homeowner for only ringing the doorbell. But the homeowner was acquitted, and he said that he thought that he was in danger. So it's such a broad, open law. And in most cases, when you really look at it, that law is never exercised for African Americans. If you look at African Americans that have been in similar situations, a young man in New York City, some European kids went to his home to fight his child, and he shot one of them. He was convicted, and it was in his home where he shot him at. Yeah. So those laws does not really extend to us. And unfortunately, those laws should really be looked at and critiqued, because what we're seeing is the murder of African Americans, and almost the same thing that we see, what we seen in the 60s, where you can kill an African American and don't have to worry about it because I'm going to take care of my brother type of situation. And until we really look at it for what it really is, we're going to continue to be on the merry-go-round. I mean, everybody doesn't really want to exist that we still have racial problems in America, but we still have them. And when you speak about them, then they label you as the racist. They label you as the one that's being ugly. And I tell anybody that when you speak of American history, it's already ugly. So anything that comes out of my mouth is going to be kind of ugly, especially if I'm an African American. I've been one of the ones that have been wronged by so many for so long.
Okay, well, tell me, what are you doing with the children to make a difference?
Well, we definitely are taking the kids that are in our program, teaching them to be entrepreneurs and giving them skills where they don't go out begging for jobs. Okay. And when you really look at the condition of what we're dealing with as a people, so many people have celebrated the President of the United States because that's our first African-American president that we have put in the White House. But the actually accomplishment of one man without the accomplishment of all of us still is no accomplishment at all. Meaning that if he's in the White House and his people that are outside of the White House that is from the same race that he is in a grave condition, then he can't rise above the condition of his people. So when he sits inside of that limousine and look out and see what he sees outside of the windows, he can't be too happy.
Thank you so much for being here, Silky Slim and Attorney Afi Patterson.
Thank you.
I think it's been a very informative show. And to my listening audience and my viewing audience, thank you so much. And we're signing off. We'll see you the next time.